Hey, Scott from MyGrowthRings.com here. Welcome back once again to our midweek follow-up episode that I like to call Stumped Q&A. The purpose behind these episodes is to follow up from the weekend video, and usually where I leave something important out, and we follow up on your questions, comments, and cheap shots. So what we're going to cover today is the questions that came from the weekend video where I covered a little bit about my steady rest, also the lathe tool holder that I use, and I also spoke a little bit about this little dingus, this little hand wheel that also is used for honing. Um, I was just filling in because I had some issues with timing, and so it was a very brief video. We had very few questions, but I realized there was some stuff I wanted to share. If you had any interest in reproducing this steady rest, I'm going to give you some hints in this video so you can do that. We'll also talk about how to do that tool rest or that chisel holder, the candy cane chisel holder. But let's go ahead and get to your questions. Ronald asked, for lathe turning, are there any tricks to add weight to the Shopsmith? Yes. Number one, always leave, if you have it, always leave your jointer mounted on the end. That's lots of extra weight that'll help hold the machine steady. Also, at Shopsmith in Dayton, in their R&D department, they've got these bags of, they're basically bags of sand. They probably have lead pellets in them, but these bags that they hang and drape over the weigh tubes and the bench tubes when they're doing some of their destructive testing. And that works really well for dampening vibration. But nothing beats having your wood in balance. And so doing things like pre-cutting your bowl blanks on the bandsaw to roughly round size, making sure that when you turn it on, if it feels like it's shaking like crazy, maybe you could remount that on your faceplate again. Just practice smart and safe wood turning. Additionally, Ronald asked a question about a speed reducer. There are three ways of reducing speed. You can purchase, if you happen to have the mechanical version of the headstock, that's the version that I have here, where you turn a speed control on the front and you're changing the size of pulleys. For this one, you can buy an aftermarket Shopsmith manufactured speed reducer that is still a mechanical device, but it brings the speed way down. I forget, it's like 7 to 1. It's quite a reduction. You can make your own speed reducer. I wrote about that on my blog, and if I can remember, I'll put a link to that in the video description. If I forget to do that, somebody remind me. And the other option is to get the electronic variable speed headstock that Shopsmith manufactures called the Power Pro. That one will go down to, I think it's 100 RPM, which is incredibly slow. And once you have that, drilling things like using giant Forstner bits and fly cutters and things like that is a breeze. So anyway, with those options, you should be able to practice some safe turning. Bill, okay, so Bill asked about the chisel holder, wanted to know how it mounts. Bruce pointed out, he said, did I miss the part about the plans for the candy cane? And Stuart said that he made one of those holders and gave it away because he could never find the chisel that he needed. So let's talk about this candy cane chisel holder. First off, to Stuart's point, you're going to want to go ahead and write on the back of your chisel what it is that the chisel is. Now this is a mixed bag. It's got my son's name on this one. It says boy. This one's got my initial right there with an M. Some of these are numbered. Doesn't matter. You can take these and just kiss them to a sander if they've got markings on them already. But just take a Sharpie marker and abbreviate it or draw a shape on there that'll help you remember what chisel you're reaching for. Okay, so first off, how this thing works. And this one isn't perfect. I made one that's more better than this, and I'll explain why. But you can see that it's made of two identical side pieces. This is made of wood, but it could be made of plywood. I would use a decent, like Baltic birch plywood if you're going to go to the trouble. You're going to want to make sure that this part right here will go over the 1.75" weigh tubes. You want to make sure this part that goes between the weigh tubes doesn't hit the other weigh tube. All right, so it just has to be narrow enough to fit in between them. And you want to make sure that this is long enough to reach down beyond the bench tubes. So you can see here that it actually rests against the bench tubes. Now, I would suggest that it needs to be a little longer than this one, and you can see why when I hold this up and show you that some of these chisels extend beyond the sides. And there have been times where I've pulled this off and I'm looking for a place to set it. And in this space, I don't have any pegboard or slat board. And so I end up setting it on the floor. Well, if I set this on the floor, it's possible that these will come into contact with the floor. So I would make this long enough that when you rest your chisel against that bottom dowel, that it's longer than the longest chisel you plan to stick in it. So let's take a look at this end where you can see where I've drilled it or through drilled it for the dowels. I want to have these two dowels far enough apart that my chisel will be nestled in there, but I can still remove it. So measure the widest part of your chisel handle. Down at the bottom, I need those dowels to be far enough apart that the chisel will fit through, but not pass completely through. So I positioned mine so that it fits the ferrule, that metal ring. It'll pass right to there and sit against the shoulder. That way, any chisel that I put in here is going to be able to fit just fine, but never ever drop through that. And then the distance from here to here is just a matter of where do you want those to stop so that they don't extend beyond the bottom. And I would think that you would want to have this at least at about the middle point of the chisels. So to that question, let's see who asked that. Bruce asked the question, did I miss the drawing for that? No, you did not, because I did not provide one. I started to draw that out one time in Microsoft Paint and realized that I couldn't make that fit on 8.5 by 11 paper. It's a little bit longer than 11 inches. But I've got a piece of plywood right here that measures, oh, what does this measure? Doesn't help. Okay, this one measures 7 inches. I could easily make a set of these from a 7-inch wide board. If I were to lay this on here, for example, and position it just right, that fits within 7 inches. All right. You could take almost anything. You got a Rust-Oleum can here, and I could position that so that I got about inch and a half on this side. I'll trace this. Do that. And that for sure is going to fit over that 1.75 inches with plenty of room to spare. And then with a straight edge, just continue that line on down. Round that off just for fun. Round that off like that, like a candy cane. Come around to the top. And there we go. That's all it has to be. All right, and then just a matter of lay your chisels on here and determine where you should drill for your dowels in order to fit. If that's too narrow, I can draw this a little bit further out this direction. And now look how wide this can be. All right, so it's really not all that complicated. If you put them together with some two-sided tape and saw them at the same time and drill them at the same time and hit them on your drum sander together, they'll be a perfect match for each other, and they just work. Now, one other thing I'll point out to you is I always put a dowel over on this side, and that way I can easily hang this on pegboard. I don't put little hooks on pegboard. I use slightly longer hooks, longer pegs to hang them, and that works every time. Similarly, for making the steady rest, the tubes on the way tube are 7 inches center to center. So I took 3 layers of 1/2-inch plywood, Baltic birch plywood. I cut them to a size that I thought would be about right, and I don't know, I haven't measured this yet. That looks to be about a foot. Um, it's actually 11 inches. I made it 11 inches wide. I think I mentioned I'd make it a little bit wider if I was to start over, so let's go 12 inches. That's just a 1/2 inch wider on each side. Take an 1 3/4 Forstner bit, drill a hole 7 inches center to center on the bottom, and of course, use a fence to position that. You could have a straight edge here, drill the hole, and then cut it off on your table saw or some saw. And then I did all of the machining of everything with these together and sanded them against the sanding disc. And then I think I used a scroll saw to cut the large hole out of all of them. And then I took the 3 pieces apart and did the individual machining of the 3 parts. So the back part is solid. It just has the big hole in the center and the outside shape. The middle layer, I actually cut out the sections where I was going to put these extrusions. So I didn't dado anything. It's just the center section doesn't exist where these fit. And to get as much reach as I could here, I went ahead and just drilled that with a Forstner bit, but that could have been cut with a scroll saw. And I could have gone even a little bit deeper, but for what I was needing, that gave me all the reach that I needed. So I then realized after mounting this on the machine that it was a little bit wobbly, and that's when I added these pieces. These are flush with the top of the way tube, and that keeps this from teeter-tottering once locked in place. I'm just rambling. This video is longer than the original video. I mentioned that on the actual hand wheel that I use in my real shop, that I had this about 2 inches wide and I have leather on it. But in both cases, I rounded over the edge, and I use that to get rid of the burr on the inside of a gouge. When I sharpen a gouge on this, I'm just sharpening or honing. I'm not grinding with these. And so that's how I get away. What size is this? I think it's 5 inches because it's the size of the paper that I keep handy. And I use silicon carbide sandpaper. All right. I'm not making any promises about this weekend video, but there are things I want to do with you that I think you're going to enjoy. So thanks for watching. Join me this weekend and we'll see what happens. All right. Make it a great week.